Here's a piece of an orange. And I'm going to eat this. And when I do, I'm going to feel something. I'm going to taste something. A transfer of information is going to happen. On the surface, it feels like something in that orange had taste. And I sensed it, and that was it. That's what that orange tasted like. That's how I always thought it worked. But what if I told you that the taste of that orange was a tiny fraction of what was actually going on there? And that there was a massive amount of additional information encoded in that experience. Not just about the orange, but about me and my surroundings and you and my past, present, and possibly my future. What if I told you that eating that orange created a perfect snapshot of exactly who I was at that moment? Like a more perfect picture than I could get from my own DNA. Every day, we eat the ultimate personal status update. Everything we are and everything we have been is distilled and packaged into a single moment. I want to know how we can access that information. And what can we learn from it? And what can we do with it? So let me tell you how I got into this. Because my story starts in the late 70s in Austin, Texas, when a short Iranian guy who kind of looked like Persian John Lennon asked a tall, daydreaming hippie out to dinner. She was from a small town, and she was charmed by his jumpy, broken English. And she decided that dinner would probably be exotic and delicious, but at the very least it would be entertaining. So over the next few years, my dad's English got way better, and my mom mastered Farsi. But regardless of what language they were butchering, trying to talk to each other, the conversation was always about food. And that made me a confused but well-fed baby. 10 out of 12 of my first words were food words, split between two languages. And most of my memories from childhood revolve around food. And now, it's my job to play with food all day. And it's absolutely my parents' fault. Because food and family, my family, shaped me from the very beginning. But the defining moment in my life was when my dad died a few years ago. Now, this is not a sad story. My dad was a wonderfully hilarious and ridiculous human being. And he was just not a sad story kind of guy. But the morning after he died, I woke up to this suffocating sense of dread that I would forget his hands or his voice or his amazing ability to mistranslate the punchline of a joke and still have you laugh, usually at him. And it's apparently a very common fear to worry about losing memories that we cherish. So I woke up that morning and I walked downstairs to our kitchen and I found 3 of his brothers, my uncles, sitting around a table doing what they did best, which was eating insane quantities of food. So I sat down and joined them, and I remembered having toasted bread with cheese, beets, and leftover shish kebab, which was kind of our usual thing. And with one bite of that, memories of my dad hit me so hard that I remember taking my hands and pressing them in my forehead just to get a grip. Because all of a sudden I was 10, and my dad was cooking for my friends and I at my birthday party. And then I remember being 16 and in a lot of trouble, sitting at a very silent, awkward, and tense breakfast table the morning after my parents found out that I set a field on fire with illegal fireworks. And then I remembered the last time I ever had breakfast with my dad. And it was wonderful. all these memories came out of nowhere in perfect clarity from a bite of leftovers. So at the time, I'd been studying biochemistry in college, and I'd fallen head over heels in love with the science of cooking. So I was in this mindset where I thought, maybe there's something about the science of eating, some secrets there, that would help me figure out what was going on, and possibly help me strengthen this connection that I felt to my dad. So I started researching what we knew about it. And the first thing I found was that in English, the word we use most often to describe food is taste. But taste is only the beginning. It doesn't come close to capturing everything that happens when we eat. And I found that scientists prefer another word, a more powerful word, to encapsulate that entire experience, and that word is flavor. Now, my first reaction was, I thought taste and flavor were the same thing. I use them interchangeably all the time, and I definitely didn't think that flavor was some profound philosophical concept that needed defining. But flavor is profound, and we can't even agree on exactly what it is yet. But there's a general consensus that it starts with all 5 of our senses. So the most obvious is taste. It's the one that we switch in and out with flavor all the time. But with just taste, we wouldn't even be able to tell or identify what foods are in our own mouths. Because our tongues are stupid. For real, you get sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. And that's it. Smell is the sense that starts to layer on the characteristic identity of individual foods. So whether they're smoky, or floral, or fruity, or nutty. And you can smell things 2 different ways, both before and after you put food in your mouth. And it's that second type of smelling that causes your brain to combine taste and smell to tell what's going on. So what I mean by that is, if I eat this piece of candy, as it's on my tongue, I'm going to be tasting it. And at the same time, there's going to be aromas traveling up the back of my throat to be smelled. And the combination of the 2 is how I figure out what this candy is. So if I tried that same thing, holding my nose, it's almost impossible. Because I could taste it. It's sweet, sour. This is weird. But that's it. If I let go of my nose, it's amazing. It's like a spotlight turns on in my head. And I can tell you without a doubt that that's lime. So touch comes in, the third sense, and it builds shades of contrast on the first 2, with temperature, texture, and burning, and cooling, and numbing, and tingling. All those sensations that we get from hot chili peppers and mint and horseradish, it's touch, not taste. And at that point, you get hearing, which accents the whole ensemble. You get the percussive sounds of crunchy foods that echo through your jawbone. And you get the soft hissing of anything bubbly. And then vision comes in and ties everything together, because visual cues set our expectations and our context for what we're eating. Now, all these senses are not static. They're constantly changing depending on your genetics and your current physical condition. So I have a question. I have some questions. How old are you? Are you male or female? What time is it? Are you sick? When was the last time you slept? When was the last time you ate? When was the last time you smoked? All of this stuff affects how your sensory machinery works at any given moment, and that embeds another layer of information in the data that they collect. But at this point, that data is just raw. It's meaningless. It's paint, not a painting. Flavor is a painting, and our brains are the painters. And the process by which that painting is created is where our knowledge just drops off. And it's in this sort of gray area that I think this vast wealth of information lies, waiting to be discovered, and where I think I might find my most profound connections to my dad. So what makes that painter paint? We know a few things. So we know that the senses can talk to each other through our brains. So when I see a strawberry, if I see a more vibrantly red strawberry, it's going to smell more aromatic. And if I'm eating potato chips, if I hear a louder potato chip, it's going to make it feel crispier in my mouth. So there's this tug of war that happens between the senses in our brains regarding data from the food. But what about our surroundings? What about information about my mood and my memories and my focus and attention? What does that do for flavor? Because we know it matters, we just don't know exactly how much. And I think we might find some of those answers by looking at the concept of thresholds in our senses. So by thresholds, I mean to perceive salt. There needs to be, I'm not going to eat this, there needs to be enough salt in this piece of food to set off sensors on my tongue. And the same holds true for all of our other senses, whether something is aromatic enough to smell or loud enough to hear. So if we have thresholds for all of our senses, do we have thresholds for the other half of flavor? Like, is there a point at which my memories or my attention start to affect the flavor that I perceive when I eat? So I think that, for instance, eating seafood is way better when you're near the ocean. But what I want to know is, exactly how far from the ocean do I have to be to affect flavor? Or how vivid and grotesque do my memories of food poisoning have to be to affect how I feel about milk? Or how tired do I have to be to affect the flavor of coffee? Or how in love do I have to be to affect the flavor of chocolate? Now, with the senses, we can actually lower our thresholds and get more sensitive, better at detecting subtle signals. So can we do that with the other stuff? Are there ways where I can train myself to become more in tune with culture or memory and connect with those things better when I eat? Now, the craziest thing about our senses is that even below the lowest threshold, our experiences are still affected. Salt still affects your perception of flavor, even when there's so little salt that you can't pick out the saltiness itself. And there can be particles, tiny pieces of food in a sauce that are too small for your tongue to be able to read them and say, these are lumps. And even though you can't consciously pick them out, they affect the way that fluid moves around in your mouth, and they affect the texture. So these things are in the background. We're not even consciously aware of them, and they're affecting our reality of this flavor perception. And that leads me to the thing that I cannot get out of my head. What if it all matters? I'm serious. I'm talking about memories we've forgotten and emotions that have faded away and tiny details from our environment that we don't even care about. What if flavor forces us to take all 5 of our senses and funnel it through this lens of who we are, of everything that's happening and has happened in our lives? What if flavor really is this ultimate personal status update? It would contain a staggering amount of information. So all of our individual, unique life experiences would mean that no 2 people have ever experienced the same flavor. It would mean that no one person has ever experienced the same flavor twice. And we could use that to find something like a fingerprint. But even better and more specific, because it'd be talking about individual moments in a person's life. And it could tell us how that person's doing emotionally or physically. And all of our interactions around food and in the vicinity of food would mean that flavor could connect us in some really wild ways. So anytime you eat in the vicinity of another human being, you form part of that person's permanent flavor record, flavor memory. And we could use that to trace the dynamics between us, whether it's a relationship between 2 people or a movement across entire cultures. Reality check. This is going to be hard. We're talking about the intersection between our food, which is complex, our bodies, which are complicated, and our minds, which are usually crazy. So to unearth flavor and use it as a societal or personal litmus test or x-ray, we're going to need to figure out a way to study all of this at once. But luckily for us, it's possible now, because this is the era of big data. So computer people tell me. I mean, we've figured out how to decode genomes and map entire systems that for a very long time we thought were impossibly complex. So we may not be far from figuring out a platform on which to study flavor, but it doesn't even exist without people. None of this matters without human beings eating food. There is no flavor until that thing is inside of your mouth. So if we're going to get anything from flavor, even learn how to define what it is, we need to get used to talking about it more. So I have a homework assignment. The next time you eat anything, experience what you're eating. Check in with all 5 of your senses and see what each of them is telling you and contributing to your experience. And then stop and think about where you are and how you feel. And please, think about who you're with and what you remember. Because the flavor that you experience is going to be wrapped up in exactly who you are at that moment. So take that moment to see what you might discover. Thank you.